Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener-supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Glad you're here today. We have Sami Aaron, and Sami is a eco-activist. Is that a good way to say that?
Sure, that sounds good, yeah.
She has a work that she calls the Resilient Activist, which works with eco-activists and the psychology of that, and as well as so many things that we're going to jump into. Her love for nature, her love for meditation and for yoga, all are things that I love too, and things that I'm really just, I think I'm just like a beginner, a novice who's learning. So it's fun to have you here. Thank you, Sami, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Fred. This is going to be fun.
Excellent. Let's just for people who are listening, let's just give just a little bit of your backstory, like where you're born, where you grew up, and then we're going to dive into your current work. Just give us enough of a background to give a sense of who you are.
Okay, stuff I haven't thought about in a while. I was born in Racine, Wisconsin. We moved every single year of my life until after I graduated high school. So went to different schools, lived in Kansas City, different areas, lived in the Washington, D.C. area, ended up graduating high school in Chicago area, and went to college for a little bit in central Illinois, came back to Kansas City, and met my husband, and we were married 50 years ago.
Wow, congratulations.
Just had our anniversary. And so we've lived here.
Did you meet in college or something?
Oh, no. His side of the family is related to my side of the family. And it was one of those where, it's way too, you don't have enough time to record that whole story. But, and what else do you want to know? That's that background.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'll tell you. So speaking spirituality adventures, I'm like, what did I get from moving every single year? And part of what I got was this sense that nothing's permanent, right? I didn't maintain, they ask questions on when you're putting in passwords, like, what was your third grade teacher's name? I don't have a clue. And I don't know the name of anybody I went to school with. I really I didn't gather a community of people growing up. I didn't gather a homeland or a hometown. And so I think it gave me this just sense of just being who I am without attachment. It wasn't easy. It wasn't really what I would have wished for.
Right.
But it's been a really interesting takeaway, I guess I would say.
I was thinking of, I think in the Buddhist tradition, they talk about impermanence. Mm-hmm. Is the word?
Yep.
I'm not sure the word is anika. Is it anika or something?
I don't know, sure. Like the Sanskrit.
I'm not really great on the Sanskrit stuff.
Yeah.
But I know that is a the dealing with change is like the only constant.
It's the only thing you can count on. Mm-hmm. You betcha. Yeah.
So yeah. Well, so let's kind of then jump into what drew you into the things that you love, your passions that you get up and live for every day. Let's take us into that space.
So I didn't have nobody when I was growing up, my family really had no connection to nature. There was nothing we ever did as a family, out in nature. But I remember within weeks after getting married, I'm out buying house plants. It was like the first thing I needed were plants to be around me. And so plants, gardening has always been kind of my thing. I was a software developer had my own company for 35 years, just back when people were getting their first computer in like a big corporate office. There'd be one shared computer on the floor that kind of thing.
Like a mainframe thing? Or
No, well, the mainframe, yeah. So I started with that, but then when people started getting the PCs, it was like Interstate Bakeries, for example, had one computer with the 2 floppy drives. And I was managing their budgets for all of their, Dolly Madison and Hostess production facilities around the country on this one little 2 floppy drive computer. But anyway, so it was an really interesting
you
time.
saved too much information, you lost it.
Oh, you'd have to put in, you betcha. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Talk about learning experiences. But it was something that really called to me, kind of that analytical, detail-oriented piece was really, I loved it. It was one of those people who, so many people are really drawn to technology and what it can do to expand how this computer works up here, And so I had that. It also gave me because I had my own company, I was able to learn about a lot of different businesses and how they function and what they needed. It was kind of my first foray into taking care of people. I had one client one time who I'd written a program and she was trying to print it out, and all she knew was to do 47 steps to get it into the word processor so she could print it. And I said to her, if you just click this one button, it would print. And she just started crying. And it was interesting. It was a really interesting perspective that kind of has really helped me running a nonprofit, is really seeing people where they are with what they need. I taught Lamaze childbirth classes, oh my gosh, back in the day, which is nothing different from yoga and meditation. It was breathing practices, deep guided body relaxation, preparedness, knowing what's going to happen. So it was interesting how that kind of shifted when I started yoga. I really became an environmental activist probably 30 or 40 years ago, just really caring about different species. I didn't really understand about plants, the relationship between plants and our water systems, and plants and our clean air, and plants and birds and bees and butterflies, until some time down in the Flint Hills and really understanding the relationship between native plants that can have root systems 15 feet deep. So you're not watering every day, right? With our plants that didn't grow up around here that have root systems just a couple of inches deep. So I really got a deeper understanding of that through time spent down in the Flint Hills in Kansas. I don't know where else you want me to go with that.
Well, so your early interest in nature and environmental activism came from just a genuine love for plants. Mm-hmm. And then you started studying about some ecosystems.
Right.
This was all on your own, right?
I was just interested.
Just curiosity. Mm-hmm. You're studying ecosystems. You're growing plants. You're learning that, and so then something though accelerated all of that.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's a difficult story for those who are listening. So I kind of shared that. Caring about the planet, caring about Earth Day, caring about plastic straws, all the environmental things over a lot of years with my older son. He was an environmental activist himself and was in school working on his master's degree in urban and regional planning. He was in a joint law program, and we would just always joke with him that he was going to be the only attorney in the world whose parents would always have to support him because he'd be working for some, financially strapped nonprofit who didn't have the funds to pay him a living wage. And almost 20 years ago, Fred, he just got to the point looking at the big global picture of climate change, all the interrelated social injustices that go along with it, and how systemic all of that is, and felt that there was nothing he was going to be able to do to make any difference. And we lost him to suicide in 2003. And that was really a huge catalyst, because as much as I thought, yeah, go ahead.
Well, so he picked up that love for the environment just from your hobby interests. Would that be true? Or?
Some of that's true. I can remember he was about 4 years old, and I found him sitting on the back porch by himself with a grasshopper, and he was really interested in this grasshopper and was pulling off one leg at a time just to see if it could still hop, right?
It sounds like a very boyish thing to do.
Doesn't it? And I remember that conversation about, well, how do you think that grasshopper feels with a great big old human, And so I think there were things that did come up in his awareness, but he really got that itching early to really care for nature and understand his human, superiority, or, that we think humans are the be all and end all. Yeah. It's not really the reality.
The supremacy of
human supremacy. Yeah.
Homo sapiens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So gosh, so he, due to he got so aware of what's happening to our planet. Yeah. So, and that the psychology of that, and
he had left a suicide note a year prior, and had seen a psychiatrist regularly, seen a psychologist regularly, was seeing a therapist. He had developed a social phobia. Whereas before, he received a citation posthumously from the mayor of Oakland, California, thanking him for the work he had done in that community. So he was a public speaker, and while he was in law school, he just kind of lost all that. And obviously, so the mental health community at the time had no clue about the emotional impact of climate change on those people, kind, caring, giving souls who wanted to make a difference. So there was, whatever services they gave him, obviously, were not helpful. So immediately, the day after his funeral, one of his close friends took me to yoga. I started a deep yoga practice. It was like some days the only thing I could make myself do. Really got into pranayama, yoga breathing practices, which is its own deep practice. Really good for grief. We carry grief in our hearts and our lungs, right in the chest. So that practice was really, really good. I started teaching workshops in Heal Your Grieving Heart workshops and so on. Really spent a lot of time focusing on yoga, became a yoga meditation teacher. And in the interim, spent a lot of time in nature. So the whole grieving period, there were days when there was nothing I could do but go out to nature. I didn't care if it was tick season. I didn't care if it was raining. I didn't care how cold it was outside. I had to spend time in nature. And there was this whole process of when I would do that and immerse myself, not for just 20 minutes, right? Or not to go on a run or a hike, but to be in that place, there was often this sense of, I would find some place in nature that just called to me. Like I would just go there, like I was drawn to it. And when I looked around to try and figure out where I was going to sit or what I was going to do, there would be this sense of just absolute attraction. Like I'd be so attracted to this place. And there was always this sense that I could be or say or do whatever I wanted. I could talk to a tree. I could scream at a rock, right? I could throw sticks or stones, and everything that came out of my heart was completely acceptable. It wasn't going to hurt anything, right? There's nothing I could do to Mother Nature personally as an individual. I'm not talking about corporations or governments, right? I'm talking about individual human beings with nothing explosive in their hands to put down. There's nothing I could do that the earth couldn't handle. And there was always this sense when I could really let it out that I could leave it there. I could leave that particular grief out in nature. And there was always more to come. It wasn't like, oh, I'm good, right? This is good. So it was really helpful when these metaphors kept showing up in nature, different aspects that kind of related to whatever it was I was pondering about that particular day.
So I'm just curious. So when this was when you were in Kansas City.
And other places. I mean, I would go, he was in California, he was buried in California, so I'd go spend weeks out there.
Okay.
Sometimes. But yeah, here
like
kind of
Kansas
anywhere.
City,
yeah.
where would you go? I'm just curious.
Yeah, there were some back roads in the, not roads, but trails at the Overland Park Botanical Gardens. There's Jerry Smith Park, which is out kind of East Kansas City. It didn't matter, as long as I was typically drawn to water and trees. Okay. And then there was the Flint Hills, and there were days and times I would just travel down there by myself, even for the day, and either hit the back roads. There's actually an area of the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve where we had donations after my son's death go to that spot. It's called the Bottomland Trail. And there's benches and there's some other picnic tables and stuff that the funds paid for that. And so, heading down to the Flint Hills was a really important part of my healing, and different places down there. But
so good.
Yeah.
Well, as I was sharing with you, nature has been a big part of my life, especially, when I want to get away, backpacking in the Rockies. I love, and then I still mountain bike. I'm just healing up from a mountain bike crash. I had to have a rotator cuff surgery.
Oh, not fun.
I was mountain biking up on the Smithville trails in January when it was icy, and I probably shouldn't have been there. But at any rate,
live and learn.
But I'm
live and do it again, Fred. Whatever works for you.
Yeah, I'm going to try to eliminate ice, but
okay,
frozen dirt and snow. When snow can be fairly sticky, but ice is not good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna eliminate ice, but when I can't ride in the winter, I hike.
Cool.
On the dirt trails,
yeah.
and so a lot of my friends are in the Earth Riders, and they take care of a lot of the hiking trails, dirt trails all around Kansas City.
Yeah.
And there's a little app that you can put on your phone, and you can find out if the trails are open and closed due to rain and other, but so the trail systems,
it's really cool
for me. And then, so that's why I like to ask, so where did you go?
There's a cool trail, talking about that, at Shawnee Mission Park off of Og Road. It's kind of between Midland and the park on Og Road. There's I forget what that area is called, but I went through the K-State Extension Master Naturalist training. So it's different than Master Gardeners. Master Gardeners focus on plants and foods for humans. Master Naturalists focus on ecosystems. So still with the native plant focus, but looking at it from a more ecosystem perspective. There's an area off of Og Road where the trails were put in, I'm sure by the same group, through some amazing wooded glade, and it's actually protected habitat for this elusive red-bellied snake. Oh, that's my most embarrassing moment. Do you want to hear that?
Sure.
So I knew about this.
We were doing our bonus questions. Those of you who want to join us on our support team, and you can hear our bonus questions. So she's going to give us her most embarrassing moment now.
So I knew that this area in Shawnee Mission Park was part of a red-bellied snake preservation area. And it's one of those areas where some corporation was going to be destroying some habitat somewhere with some construction. And so they needed to, kind of like reparations, purchase or maintain another undisturbed site. And so this was a site, perfect habitat for the elusive red-bellied snake.
So I'm pretty good at snakes, but I actually don't know I'm not familiar with the red-bellied snake.
Because no one's ever seen one at Shawnee Mission Park. So when I say elusive, okay, we don't even know that they're there, but the habitat is perfect for them.
There we go. Okay, so now I feel
get in the
better about my
picture.
snake idea.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
So we're talking snipes.
We're talking, you betcha. So they live together.
There we go.
So I'm taking, there was this women's group, hiking group of women, just kind of in the yoga community basically. And I said, I know this really cool place, we'll go hike. So we're on this hike, and one of the women, it's a single file, right? So you can hardly hear anybody talking. And this one woman, I'm telling them about the red-bellied snake, and she just screams and says, there's a red-bellied snake here. And we all see it. It's this long, kind of looked like a worm, and we get pictures of it. I'm so excited. And we come back, and I posted on the Master Naturalist Facebook group and say, you guys won't believe what we found. And of course, the actual naturalists who know what they're talking about are like, that is not the red-bellied snake. That was, I forget, it was some red something or other worm, that's like pretty common. And
that's
so,
hilarious.
okay, that was my embarrassing moment because I was so knowledgeable.
Oh, wow.
And so cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. There you go.
That one works. That one works. Yeah. I'm not so great. I'm good at snakes, but I'm not, there's a lot of things I'm not good at identifying. But I used to catch snakes, and have aquariums with snakes, and
that's cool.
And and then one got out, and I didn't tell my mom, and then she was cleaning the house one day, and she found a snake skin under the couch.
Oh, how nice.
And that ended my snake collection.
Yeah, I'll just bet it did.
but yeah. Yeah. And then, so, man, there's so many things I want to talk about. Let's do this. I'm going to mention several of the things that you've been involved in. And why don't you give me a quick description of that part of your life that you love.
Okay.
And then I might dive in different ways. But the first thing, your website, The Resilient Activist, it's really I like your website. It's easy to navigate, and it gives a little history of what you just told us about your son. And then, but I think the eco-psychology component, like you said, 20 years ago, people really didn't know much about that. Is that really tied into your
there's actually
activist stuff?
Not exactly. So because these terms are really interesting. There's eco-psychology, there's ecotherapy, and then there's climate anxiety and eco-anxiety, and a whole series of languages and mental health components related to people experiencing anxiety over climate change. Mm-hmm. So ecotherapy is where people, trying to get the two of them straight, eco-psychology is looking at the relationship between humans and the natural world and how that impacts us from a mental health perspective. So when we see living communities of plants or animals, we are imbued with a bit of joy, like a bit of understanding of how to live in symbiosis. When you plant a plant and you see somebody flying in and sipping that nectar, it feels good, right? So there's this psychological relationship with the natural world. Ecotherapy is a mental health tool that's been used for a lot of years, but uses nature to help people work through mental health conditions. So things like horticulture therapy, there's all kinds of aspects of bringing nature to help people through whatever they're experiencing emotionally.
Okay.
So now we get to climate change, where more and more people are more aware of what's happening globally. They're aware of what's happening locally. And there are a number of organizations. There's a Climate Psychiatry Alliance, Climate Psychology Alliance, some other organizations that have come up to help people who are experiencing issues with what's happening with the climate. So there's kind of a subset of the psychological field of people who are considering not having children. because they don't know what kind of world they're going to bring them into. So therapists who are specializing in how to help people make that decision. The Resilient Activist is a little bit unique in that it was founded. It was founded 4 years ago. So Kevin had been gone about 15 years. And it was founded to try and figure out what might have helped him and others like him, because we know the world needs inspired, visionary activists who have the resilience to see us through these really difficult times, right? The incidences of depression, suicide are just skyrocketing. Burnout, people quitting, going to work at a coffee shop because they just can't handle it anymore. So our focus is on the activists. There's a lot of these other organizations are working with everybody else who's experiencing grief and trauma from higher heat, severe weather events, wildfires. Like there's a whole lot of grief and trauma happening around the results of global warming, right? But our focus is for the activists, people working to try and make a difference, people that are heading up organizations. They've not up until recently been identified as a community in need of services, right?
Okay.
So we've actually done some research studies to be able to call out the emotional impact of what's happening, because it's not just climate change, it's governmental pushback, it's corporate pushback, it's political pushback throughout everything that's been trying to many people for 40 or 50 years have been working on this, saying, here's what's going to happen. Here's how the carbon levels are rising and other greenhouse gases. And here's the impact with sea level rise, increased wildfires and drought and famine and excessive flooding. And, and it's really difficult to have that be your day job and your passion and be told constantly you're just stupid and you're making it all up and it's fake news. And by the way, you're either fired, harassed, or around the world murdered because of that. So it's a really difficult position for people who are in that community of activists. And so that's what we're all about, is how can we support that group?
Interesting. Yeah. One of my new friends is a guy named Brian McLaren, who's an author. He's been, I don't even know how to, but he wrote, he was a pastor, church planter like me, but then many years ago went to writing activism stuff. One of his books was Everything Must Change, and it was his really deep research on the global crisis that we're in, the environmental global crisis. And so he's networked pretty extensively. You guys, I'm a networker, so it'd be a good connection. He would probably love to hear, because he's got a pretty big network in that space as well.
That's fantastic.
And he was kind of like, came from a really conservative evangelical background, and now, has kind of been a voice for people who have deconstructed and reconstructed, and are in these still a space of faith, but kind of rethought a whole lot of stuff, including global.
Well, I'll just add on to that there are so many faith-based organizations that do get it, that are really focusing on earth care. And, in Kansas City here, there's a Sustainable Sanctuary Coalition. I know there's Lutherans for Earth Care. there's a whole bunch of, I know someone from the Baptist Theological Seminary who was she and I met at a drawdown program. Drawdown is like drawing, this international program to draw down levels of carbon. So it has really permeated a lot of faith-based communities. And, there is that, just like there's that psychological connection through eco-psychology, there's a spiritual connection to who created all this and this is pretty complicated, right? Who figured out that clean water required pollinators? Like, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it's just so interesting. And so it's heartwarming to see the number of communities, including faith-based organizations, really stepping up.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember I did a series on the earth, and came out of like Genesis, and then there's 2 words to where you're in the garden, and the Lord God says to tend and watch the garden, and so it's like the stewardship of the earth.
It's real different than holding dominion over it, isn't
right?
it? Very different perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I came out of that, and what's interesting is those words that tend and watch are typically used for the priests in the temple or sanctuary. So it's actually seeing the garden as a temple sanctuary that we are stewards of. And
I love that image.
Isn't that kind of cool?
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. So the resilient activist, the next one I wanted to look at is climate reality leadership.
Okay.
What was that about?
So that was a program that past Vice President Al Gore started when he lost the presidential election. And I'm just going to say, thank God he lost, because he wouldn't have had the wherewithal or the energy to do what he's been able to do in all these years since then. So it's a global program, Climate Reality Leaders. He offers training that's completely paid for. So I went to one, I think about 5 years ago. There were 2,000 people there or so. It was in Minneapolis in their big convention center. 3 days of training, no cost. They included an amazing lunch every day, no cost. And all you had to do basically was pay your own transportation and lodging. And it was a global community giving an opportunity to really understand what's happening with severe weather events, sea level rise, droughts, and so on, industrial issues, technological issues, clear cutting, factory farming around the world, and really come away with a really deep understanding globally of what's happening. And at that time, he trained over 20,000 people in that. Since then, on Zoom, they had like over 5,000 people, when they shifted to doing it on Zoom. So that's what that is. And it's just it took my level of environmental understanding like way higher than it had been.
Okay.
Yeah. And they just encourage and support people who are advocates in whatever area suits them globally.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
What about Kansas Master Naturalist Program? I mentioned that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Master Naturalist, even though it comes out of K-State and it's pretty much agricultural focused, it's a great way to understand how everything interacts within ecosystems. And they do focus on Kansas, but to get that whole perspective on the cycle of life, and why we need pollinators, and why, pollinators produce fruit, which is going to keep the fruit, the pits and the seeds from the fruits, what's going to keep other trees, it's going to help them reproduce. And so trees give us, oxygen, right? We kind of need that. And then how the whole water cycle works. But it's kind of everything you can imagine having to do with nature in this area. And it's really minimal. I think basically you pay, it's not very much money. You're mostly paying for like printouts and things like that. It's citizen science. And so it's the opportunity you commit to giving back so many volunteer hours a year. So presentations or tours or doing work days at different places, and you commit to taking 10 hours or something like that of advanced training. So you keep your knowledge up.
Okay.
Open to anybody who cares.
Interesting.
It's a really cool program. Yeah.
And then did you do something called Pollinator Prairie out of that?
Right. And so this was a site in Old Olathe, near downtown Olathe, in a little neighborhood that from the 1950s until the late 1980s, there was a company that had property just about a square block or so right next to the railroad tracks that go right through Old Town Olathe. and it was called Chemical Commodities. And they were one of the sites. This was before the Environmental Protection Agency. So in the 1950s and 60s, it didn't start till 1970. They were a site that was approved to take chemical waste from manufacturing companies. And they did. And then they were supposed to do something with those chemicals, and they didn't. They put them in big bins kind of down in the ground, which leaked out, caught fire all the time. They finally put up a really tall privacy fence. And in the late 80s, the fire department had just kind of had it with them. The EPA hadn't known about them yet at that point. Anyway, the EPA got involved. They shut them down. They had zero liability because the owner somehow figured out how to have a fire of all the paperwork before the EPA came in. It was pretty interesting. Anyway.
Sounds like a movie.
It would make a great movie. So this was about a 3-acre site, and there were houses like right on the edge of the property. So they came in, had to remove 8 foot of soil on about an acre, just take it out because it was so toxic. They bought the little houses that were there on the property. They put in air quality abatement equipment in about 40 homes. So what happens in a rainfall, all the chemicals get washed down into the groundwater, right? And then that evaporates and comes up in people's homes. So they had that going on. And what was interesting is there was a small avionics company that in their manufacturing process, they had some chemicals that they sent to this site. They followed all the protocol just like they were supposed to do. And from a chemical perspective, that company retained responsibility for seeing to it to the end of its life, that chemical. So even though they did the right thing, the company they sent it to didn't. Sometime during this 30 years, Boeing company bought that little avionics company. So when the EPA came in and they set this up as a Superfund site, Boeing took the lead, the helm, and said, we will help manage the restoration of this site. And they decided to put in this pollinator habitat. So they brought in fresh soil, worked with Chip Taylor, who is a professor emeritus at KU. He started Monarch Watch. He's the world-renowned expert in monarch butterflies and milkweeds. He came in and helped design the property, and it's a master naturalist site. And so the first official project of the Master Naturalist Group, I was able to be the coordinating person to get us involved in maintaining the site, and it's open to the public 24/7. We have a couple great events for kids and for the public really twice a year. So pollinatorprairie.org, I think I'll get you there. But anyway,
cool.
Yeah.
So that's something that kids can get involved in.
Kids, teachers, because it's I'll tell you what, the emotional impact of being there. So there was, right after the previous president's inauguration, there was a bill put into the House of Representatives to eliminate the Environmental Protection Agency. Eliminate it. And I'll tell you the grief that I felt as an activist, having seen what the EPA was able to do with this site that was so dead, right? That's where I went to grieve the possibility that the EPA could actually be removed, defunded, right? There's this healing, that whole piece of being in a site that was totally destroyed, and now it's joyful and it's full of life and it's beautiful. That's why the pollinator prairie and sites like it are really, really valuable.
It's like it's a beautiful
parable, metaphor. Yeah, I don't know. You find the right word, but yeah. And here's the thing.
That's cool.
You can never plant any trees on it because there are the way that they put down, there's a particular fabric that they use that covers the toxic soil and that filters the water as it comes through. And you can't plant any trees because the roots would damage that fabric. So, and the EPA will monitor it in perpetuity, or as long as they're around, I guess. But But that's the whole, there's always this little bit of, oh, so there won't ever be any trees here. Do you know? It's like the sorrow is always a little bit there. It's not going to be a natural habitat. It's going to have to be a man-managed, woman-managed habitat. So anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I love your involvement with mindfulness meditation and yoga, but I want to chat a little bit, make sure, because I don't want to miss an opportunity to talk about this. So your book that you have for folks who are watching, Sami Aaron, Experience Your 54 Senses, a companion workbook for the nature process.
Yeah, so that was so interesting.
Unpack that. And I actually did, just last Sunday, did one of the exercises out of this in a meditation out in nature. So it was really fun.
Which one did you do?
You did the one about, you tell the story about the dog or the pooch. And then try to go into nature with that kind of attitude where you're soaking in everything. And so, that one.
That's a little story about my little dog Cookie. And just visualizing what she was like out in nature, right? Off leash, right? And it was like all 4 of her feet knew right where to step. And her nose was leading her where she needed to go. And her hair was kind of standing on end. And her tail was up, and it was just like she was just there. She wasn't anywhere else. She wasn't worried about her next meal. She wasn't worried about the bills. She wasn't worried about anything I said to her the day before, right? She was just absolutely, through all of her senses, just receiving that space in nature. So that really started for me. All that time I said I spent in nature in grief and finding my way through grief. I met a woman through an online course she was teaching, Tabitha Jane, in Scotland, and she wrote a book. She hadn't written it yet. She was really early on, having lost her brother, and going through this same process. Like, just if I go out to nature and I do these 5 things for my grief or whatever it is I'm focused on, I feel so much better afterwards. And she is a transpersonal psychologist and was able to kind of turn this into 5 simple steps. And so when I took her course, I just connected with her immediately, and we really started to develop the nature process. She got her book. She had an early release of the book out, but we got another 2 releases of her book out, called The Nature Process.
Yeah, right.
And
Tabitha Jane,
Jayne. And what we wanted was, she had gone through some eco-psychology training, right? That connection of humans to the earth. And there were some teachers in that, I'll call it lineage, that had identified all these different senses. And so what was really interesting, so if you take, for example, your sense of sight, that's really just the receptacle. It's kind of like saying a radio has a sense of radio. Well, it doesn't. It has a sense of hearing and sound and emitting, right? So your sense of sight is really your sense of shape and form and color and design and pattern and movement. You have all these different senses coming out of what your eyes are able to pick up on. And each one of those senses informs your body and your mind and your heart of when you're safe or you're not. Right? When you're hungry or not hungry, when you hear a sound that you better pay attention to, or you hear a sound that you can just receive and relax with. So there was this list of 54 different ones, and it was fun to create a way to help us, especially us urban and suburban humans, who have lost most of our senses, right? Like your sense of touch, walking barefoot through the forest, doesn't work when you're clopping on some, cement with your spiked heels. It's a whole different way of feeling the earth. So we did that. We did some facilitator training. We were leading courses and workshops and retreats for people in the nature process. And then she really wanted to focus on business, how to bring earth care and sustainability practices into corporate arenas. I was headed for the resilient activists. And so it just kind of, I won't say it died, because it's being resurrected now, as part of what she's teaching or what I'm teaching. So it's not, there is no nature process like course or website, but the books are out there, and it's something where we like to pull on.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So like you take your vision, which is just one of the 5 senses, but then you think about all the things that your vision connects with.
Yep.
And granulate that.
Yeah.
And so you take your 5 senses and start granulating each one of those, and you come up with these 54 different ways to experience nature and to be present in nature, and then how that does have a healing impact.
Well, part of it is a mindfulness practice. So for people who are really deep meditators, especially those who go away on retreat, so you really are not distracted by everyday life, right? You can get into the sense of just being with what is. It's great detail, right? And it's through all your senses. I mean, even apparently the Buddha meditated with his eyes open, just to be with what is. And there's this sense of, the sense of touch. This table is hard, but it's smooth and it's kind of slick. And there's a ridge, and how does that feel? And everything can become a mindfulness practice, which is great for cognitive reasoning, clarity of thought, stepping away from multitasking. So if you really want to make a decision about something important, when you just are able to train your mind to focus on that one thing and notice everything about it, you come up with different answers, different solutions, different ways of being in the world than you would if you just had your notebook and your checklist, and here's what I was taught in school, and here's how we're going to run this business, or here's how I'm going to raise my kids, or here's the house I'm going to live in, here's the spiritual tradition I'm going to go through, right? It's like everything becomes this awareness of, how does that make me feel? It's a really interesting practice.
I've just noticed through my life, probably what got me into trouble in my most recent phase was this overactive brain of mine, and I had insomnia. So I noticed your yoga sleep and all these things that, and I've been pressing into some of these things now because of all I've gone through. But one of the things that has always been with me is this, like what I would call, I feel like I almost need to get into nature every day. Yep. Like I miss it if I don't.
Yep.
So movement through nature, and it can be on my bike or a mountain bike or walking. And it can just be sitting and soaking in. Like I remember reading some of John Muir's, journals, and he would go out and like look at one flower for hours on end and just soak in that one flower.
Yeah. What's his quote? I said something about, I thought I was going out and found I was going in.
Yeah. Yeah. That was in your book. I saw that, but yeah. And so I remember, there's been, like I've gone on, backpacking trips by myself and spent, days in nature alone. And, there is something about it. Like even in my cycling, like I get a lot of endorphins from that. I'll cycle sometimes I cycle with friends, and that's community, but sometimes I'm just cycling for an hour, 2 or 3 alone. And it really does something for me. And that's why I like to do gravel or mountain biking things. So I'm not like on a street interacting with cars, I like to feel like I'm moving through nature.
So if you picture that with the story of the dog,
yeah,
here you are, you have all your senses wide open, because they have to be, right? You have to know if there's a car coming up behind you. You have to know about the sunlight or water or puddles. You have to know about, are there curbs you're going to go over or something, a little rock? Is there, is there a bison coming at you through the Flint Hills, right? And so you have to have all your senses completely open and receptive, right? In every moment as you're bicycling. And when you're in that mode, as opposed to, I'm going to bicycle from here to there because I have 1 hour, right? And that's all I'm going to do. And, Anna, you got your watch and, you're in your brain at that point. You're in your logical mind. But when you're not, when you're really immersed in where you are, it's a really different practice. And
like, I don't own a trainer because I won't sit in this house and ride for even 15 minutes on a trainer because
it's not the same.
It feels almost like lifeless.
It is.
Lifeless.
It is.
But when I go out and ride or walk through nature, I feel a whole different energy going on.
Yeah. You're also receiving things called phytoncides, which are like antibiotic properties through aromatherapy, fragrances. Like, historically, why did people bring greenery into their house, evergreens, around in the winter time? Because they exude antibiotic properties, right? There's all these other things, the aroma of the soil, right? Of whatever's blossoming at that time, the rotting fruit, like you're receiving all that. Even while you're going through it, you're getting that vitamin D. Like how many of us take vitamin D tablets, right? Because we're not absorbing enough because we're not outside enough. So, yeah.
So what are, I could talk to you for hours. Okay. We're going to run out of time. But what about, what's the best resources to learn from nature, to draw teaching from nature? How, like this whole nature teaching idea?
Yeah. I think the best is, first of all, figure out what you are really drawn to in nature. And for some people, that could be a house plant, which is fine, right? It could be something in your backyard. It could be a vista. It could be someplace that just draws you in, like at the Pollinator Prairie, there's this one big old tree that has kind of an opening in the trunk, and you can kind of sit back in there and nobody would see you. It doesn't matter. It should be someplace close by your home, right? Or that you can see outside a window from your house, or that you're able to bring in, or you have pictures of it, right? That you don't save this for your 2-week vacation out at the beach. That's not going to do it. There's a lot of Native American teachings about how we need to connect to our land, this land right here that we live in. We need to observe it, the weather, the drought or the moisture, what's growing there, what critters are there. We need to be, just like you on your bike, in the land. And it can start with one plant or one tree, and you just simply notice it. Like a great way to really step into this is imagine that tree or plant or rock or water or ground, whatever it is, could talk back to you, that you could have that conversation. And there's conversations like just telling it how beautiful it is, or how, oh my gosh, what is that? Wow, that's an interesting thing. Or look how that leaf is really different than that leaf. And you do this, you get into the detail, you get out of your head, and you just witness it. You notice it, you touch it, you breathe it in, whatever your 5 senses can do. And you do that regularly. So you learn your land, your plants, your critters in every season. You imagine this tree standing there. We have a 60-year-old redbud in our yard, and I imagine how many times it stood there and the sun has come up from the east and it's flowed off to the west. How many times then has that tree witnessed that? And how would that feel if I was that tree witnessing, not moving, just receiving the movement of the sun right? And so you get anything that you can do that really calls to you, that you love to do, go do it in great detail.
Yeah.
Do it often, do it regularly, do it in every season, every time of the day. That's the best. Journal about it.
Yes.
Paint it. Write songs about it, right?
Yes.
Talk about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I started rock climbing when I was 16 down in the here in Kansas City. About the only spot you can actually do that in is right there off.
Like
it's in the northeast
Cliff
section
Drive
of Cliff
or
Drive.
something.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I started. It's a little 30-foot limestone. And we started climbing there. I was 16, and now I've climbed all over the United States and Europe, and I still climb a little bit, even though I blew myself out. But when I'm on that rock, and I don't hardly, I have a friend that started ROKC rock climbing gyms around here, but I don't really do hardly any indoor climbing because
it's the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah, I like to be on sandstone or limestone or granite or and
you're in the moment. That's the whole thing. It's a really different experience when you're in a rock climbing gym. It's all about your body and your strength and your intellect and what you can accomplish. There's competition, there's whatever. When you are out in nature, you're just simply connecting. It's a really different part of your spirit, part of your experience as a human animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, I love that stuff. Yeah, man, I can drink all of this in so long. It's beautiful. So give people, we've got to wrap this up, but give people maybe a couple of practical ways for them to begin to connect with, I think you even mentioned one time a simple way to start a garden.
Sure.
Or some people might be interested in that, or
yeah,
a simple way to, you've already said, find out what you love. I literally know some people who sit inside with phones and screens, and they don't really want to get out in nature. And my whole I kind of holy crud, there's a whole generation that's not going to know how to get out in nature, and I know what it's given me all these years, and I kind of grieve that a little bit. And I try to be an advocate to help people get back into nature. So I know you are.
I appreciate that. We have a blog post on our website. Cannot remember the name of it, but it's a young woman who had her own business. She came and took a business for good course through us. We were talking about ways to bring nature into the home. She's an interior designer, had her own company. And so she decided to stop at the grocery store and buy a $12 house plant. That was what she was going to do. She had 3 preschool age kids. Her husband was, I forget exactly the whole deal, but she was just a real sweet family, right? She buys this one house plant, and her kids start playing in the dirt, and making a mess and stuff. Her daughter comes down every morning and wants to water the house plant. So finally, with the dirt, she gave them some plates and stuff and said, go outside and dig in the dirt if that's what you want to do. And so a couple days later, it rained, and the kids brought her a bowl full of worms. Some people would find that disturbing, but she thought it was pretty cool. And so she had heard at our program of something about composting with worms. What does that mean? Worm composting. So she looks it up. She starts a compost bin out in her backyard. It was just a plastic tub with her kids. The kids are taking their produce, their leftover food from dinner, or when they're cooking a meal and they've got scraps, out to this to feed the worms now. And they're going to get the neighbors. So now the neighborhood kids are bringing their vegetables over to their house to put in the compost bin. And of course, the parents are coming with them. So now the whole neighborhood are coming outdoors together with their kids to talk about these things that none of them was doing. And she has become a great volunteer with us. I mean,
oh, cool.
Yeah, it was this one little thing that a stressed out mom decided to do, stressed out working mom decided to do that turned into a whole different way of being with her family. So that's what I'm saying. Pick one thing that just feels right and just bring it in and just go with it.
That's cool. So your website is
theresilientactivist.org.
Okay.
And we have courses. We have monthly climate cafes for anyone who's worried about climate anxiety and wants to just come talk about it. We have a Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion book club that meets once a month. We are doing some political activism with resilience, training workshops. We have a full speakers bureau on a lot of different topics. And so love to connect with people.
Okay. And then this is your book that is got packed full of ideas on how to use your senses to get connected to nature.
Cool.
And you've brought out some of the science of that and how that it can help. Like,
it's good for what ails you.
Exactly. There you go.
It's good for creativity and reasoning. When you're out in nature and you see things that are soft and rounded and working in community together, you have a real different perspective than when you look at square lines and cement and hard floors. And, it informs us differently. So thank you.
Thank you for your work, for your heart, for your passion, and the way you are helping people heal and connect and be creative and grow in relation to nature. I love that.
Thanks for what you do. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So I'm so grateful. Hope to stay connected. And everybody, I want to encourage you, pick up Sami's book, go to the website and
actually, so the book's on Amazon.
Okay.
We don't have a link on the website because it really was just available again about 2 months ago.
Oh, okay.
So, but it's accessible on Amazon. So.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We're so glad that you joined us with Sami Aaron, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Fred.
This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.